Good evening, class. Good evening, class. I would like to welcome you to our evening session. I want to thank you very much for logging on. We are very keen in beginning today's class. We want to look at chapter 4. We looked at chapter 1, 2, and 3. Chapter 4 is a quick one about the hard drive. We already set questions about the hard drive because it's the basic tool that we use when you're carrying out digital forensics. Okay, I wish we could go faster than this so that we can get started on chapter 5 for the acquisition, so that by Friday, we are able to proceed on with our hands-on sessions. And I hope you are all practicing. By end of this class, we would want to cover the following. The following items need to be covered. One, we need to define what do we term as digital media. Remember, we said when we are going to do an investigation, it's very important for us to identify this digital media. And of course, it's one that carries binary data. How do we handle information that is in digital format? We'll also be able to compare and contrast the difference between analog as well as digital. We will be able to look at the basics of a hard disk drive. What does it contain? What are the components? And of course, we always ask you questions around describing a number of its components, so we can even draw it and tell you to label the different parts and their uses. Expect everything, because you can't be using a hard drive without exactly knowing how to describe it, identify its different parts. Then we shall now go to the inner part, the logical part, where we are looking at how do we partition it? How are we able to divide it? And what are the names of the key core drives that it usually has? And we use the operating system to be able to divide these accordingly, depending on how big you'd want them to be. Then we also want to differentiate between the NTFS. These are types of the our hard disk drive, the parts and the components, and not the components, but for the hard disk drive, the different two types in which they can be partitioned or even called, and we look at the characteristics. And that is it. So I wish we can quickly cover this, because it's just a quick overview, really, and yet it's very important and examinable. Okay, so we want to first of all look at what is media, digital media. This is what a computer can use to store, transmit, receive, and manipulate data. Basically, it is that part of the computer that does our storage, the transmission, receipt of any data that we have. We look at raw data as numbers. This is usually how we define data. Data is defined as raw facts or raw numbers or characters, images, sound elements that are put together to make some meaning. Raw data is just raw facts. Information is what we term as processed data, or data that now you'll have to attach some more detail to get meaning out of it. So when data is arranged meaningfully, it then becomes information, as we can be able to see, and it's really very common. Okay, digital media. This is what is made or produced electronically or stored in a file. So whether it's a file, whether it is a text, whether it is sound, whether they're numbers, whether they're images, whether it's a video, those are the most common forms in which we always store electronic data or electronic information. Digital media is stored in a simple way by a computer, and usually it's stored on the system in what we term as binary numbers, zeros and ones. Electronically, zeros and ones. Of course, if we look at converting from the decimal to binary, yes, you divide it by 2 and you're able to get our zeros and ones. So whatever number you're given in decimal, you can be able to convert it to binary numbers. That's the computer language it understands. Then from there, it takes it to hexadecimal, where it will now take it to another level of other numbers, which we usually look at figures, ABCDs. And this you may have done, I don't know, in architecture or in computer basics. At least you should have done some basic conversions. Of course, for binary, it's only numbers, zeros and ones. So computers are very simple things. They usually use, their format is usually like that of electricity for it to work when it is on, when it's off. Usually our 1 represents when it's on. Then the 0 represents when it is off. It is the same kind of idea that the binary carries on. So you'll find that if it draws them in boxes, let me quickly annotate here. You'll find if it is to have it in boxes, you'll see ones are up, zeros are down. Ones are up, zeros are down. You're just having an illustration of how the binaries exactly work. So if they're continuous zeros, then you'll see they'll go on and on and on and on and on. Okay, so this one we're saying is a 1, this is a 0, this is a 1, and this is a 0. It's a 1, a 0, a 1. This may be 2 zeros. So depending on what you're told to really show, in this case, what we are showing is really 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 3 times, then 101, then 3 zeros. So if they ask you to illustrate it in terms of blocks, this is how you actually just illustrate it. Okay. And of course, these are just the basics of how we store our data. Why it's very important to know in what form it's transmitted in. It's very important for us to appreciate and know in what format it does appear. The computer brain here. The computer brain is usually this digital media that is stored using memory cells. And of course, there are millions of tiny cells within their memory that help it to do the thinking, the processing. So each cell either has an electrical charge of 1 or 0 because it's the binary format in which it is stored. So all digital media are made up of series of zeros and ones and nothing else. So whether it is images, whether it will combine them and come up with a whole set of different digital images. And that's why we said in forensics, whether it's digital images, work that is still in progress on volatility, we are all able to still share it as well. So right now, just remember that all digital media is represented as either a 0 or a 1, as we have seen. But of course, you can have all kinds of strings with several zeros and several ones, different patterns. 16 of them are what will help us make 1 bit. And thereafter, we go to a byte, and that is it. So this is a string of data. String of data is made up of 16 sets of zeros and ones. Look at these. They are 4 by 4. Let me quickly annotate on this and we see what we are looking at. Yes, these are blocks of 4. This is 1 block. This is a second one, a third one, and the fourth one. So all together, we have what we have, or what we term as the string of data, which has all our 16 zeros and 1. So it divides it into 4 different blocks of zeros and ones. And that's what we do have in which we save and we store our information in. Okay, one should be able to convert from binary to decimal the same way as from decimal to binary. Decimal to binary, we said we convert it by dividing by 2. And of course, we write all the way our remainders of what we have from the last all the way to the beginning. That's how we get the conversion from binary to, from decimal to binary. Now that one has a binary number and you want to convert it to decimal, you will have to multiply it, so you have to save it based on the powers. From the power of 16, 15, because it's a hexadecimal. Hexadecimal meaning that it contains our 16 strings, it's a string. So from 0 times 2 to the power 16, all the way to negative 16 times 2 power 0. So this is a format in which you're able to put and convert our binary strings into decimal places. Okay, this is supposed to be not, I don't think it's negative. It's supposed to be 1 times 2 to the power 0, not negative 16. 1 times 2, not even negative. It's just an ordinary 1 times 2 to the power 0. Then you move on. If you are to start our calculation, we would want to start all the way from here. So this is 1 times 2 to the power 0. Then this one, of course, you go to the next one. 1 times 2 to the power 1. We need to have it as systematic as possible. So that this 0 maps onto this. This is the next one. The next one is the 1. The next one is 1. Then we have 2 zeros. Of course, you know, anything multiplied by 0 still remains a 0. Then next we have the 1. It's here. Then next we have our series of zeros. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay. Ochingeho. 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is supposed to be a 1, but it's not supposed to be. This is supposed to be 1 times 2 to the power 0. Okay, so we get the numbers that correspond to it, and that is what we will get and add through. How do we handle data? Because it's in form of zeros and ones, and that's how texts are represented. It's very important for us to note that all text, images, sounds, videos, etc., as long as they are stored, they are in a storage digital format. This can be handled in digital media by our binary strings. We call it digital from the word digit, representing the 0 or 1, which are digits. Computers can process millions of speed. And of course, you know where we are heading to. Issues concerning storage and the sizes about them. And that tells us a lot, especially when we are going to do our acquisition process. You need to understand how big is the hard drive, because depending on the format or that storage device, depending on the format, you will choose one that suits it accordingly. So we don't live in a world of zeros and ones, no. We live in a world of pictures, a world of color, a world of sound, a world of letters, a world of letters. So you use, if you were to have a picture and they tell you to convert it to binary zeros and ones, one of the things you need to do is to first of all scan it. Once you scan it, it moves from analog to digital. Then it allows the computer to be able to save it, meaning that it has converted it from its analog format to zeros and ones. This is an illustration of a photograph. The original painting is made from millions and millions of colors, of course, to get all sorts of shadings that blend together. It's definitely in analog format to get this kind of beautiful picture of this kind of person. Another format in which you would have data that is still in analog are the old VHS tapes in which we would save our information. Those are very old and those are analog. To convert them, you need to have a converter that changes them from this format to any digital format, especially for movies, for videos, for songs. These are the olden ones they used to use, which were analog, and now we've moved to digital. Look at how we now store data on our DVDs or our CD-ROM drives. Here they're asking us that, okay, analog versus digital, which looks better? Definitely digital looks better. Which lasts longer? Which sounds even better? A CD or a tape? Automatically it is the tape. Sorry, it is the CD that will be able to last longer, look better, as well as even sound better as well. What happens if you copy a VHS, then copy the copy onto another copy of the copy? It's okay, you can, or depending, there are videos, there are DVDs, there are CD-ROMs that are read-write. There are those which are just read-only. So when you find that it's a read-only, the moment you write on it, that is it, it's gone. You can't rewrite on it several times. So unless if it has both the rewritable, then that allows us to write on it, erase, keep adding, keep subtracting. So some of these storage devices really are quite analog. They are really archaic in the way they used to save and store the data. So often with analog, each time we copy it, we notice that the quality reduces. Be it a photograph, the moment you take another photo of it, the quality reduces. This is because that you're trying to copy almost infinite number of possibilities from one variable media to another. So it's important for us to notice that it's not surprising that it's almost impossible to make a copy of the same original. It's just like if you have that painting, you want to make a copy of it. It is very tough unless you get another painter to come and paint a similar kind of painting. Otherwise, the best we advise you, convert it first to digital, then make a photocopy. But however, notice the issues of quality will greatly reduce. Still with digital media. In digital media here, we see that it is a lot easier to deal with media once it's in digital format, because in this kind of digital format, then we will see that our information can easily be replicated and without reducing the quality. And those are some of the differences between analog and digital data. Analog data loses the quality, especially as you're making copies, while for digital data, you do not you can always make as several copies as you can without reducing or compromising on the quality of what you have. Okay, just like if we get you notes, the same quality in which we give you the notes of that version are exactly this. You will not lose anything on what you currently do, on what you currently have. So it's very important for us to realize that the quality doesn't change. All that will change is that you can only make a copy of it. You maintain it exactly as it is. Converting. Computers need a way of getting this data and information from the analog to get it into digital by turning those millions of little pixels to get them into zeros and ones. And that's where we said that the best way of handling it as a picture is to be able to handle it using a scanner. Scanners, and they have to be high quality scanners that are able to do a good job. Like if you're to take a photograph, if you really want it good, you have to use one which has very high pixels and with a very good model. So in this process of converting an analog data or information to digital is what we term as digitalization. Of course, once we digitalize any analog item, then we can now be able to use it in a computer, use it on any kind of social media. This is the scanner we're talking about, which helps us to convert the analog into digital, because what we want is always in digital format. We can't do forensics on paperwork. That one, the ordinary forensic, that for ordinary investigators can handle that. Our own are to focus on those that are digital in nature. Look at photographs. You can use a digital camera. They are the old analog cameras that people used to use. The output wasn't as good as the digital cameras. For as long as you want a quality output, digital is the way to go for us. Music is the same. Converting it from the VHSs, you need to digitalize it, and there are specific programs that can help us to digitalize the sound. So the MIDI music, if you don't digitalize sound, then the only way you make music is to create a program that can read it in that form of its output. Just like olden tapes, I don't know, I definitely still have some of the olden songs, whether it is, I don't know, Babirie or Sekou Martins, I don't know. I had quite a number of hymns within those olden tapes. But these days I just need to go online and I search for my digital music, keep a copy of it on my phone, on my laptop, wherever I would want, because it's now digital, meaning that it's portable, it can move from one place to another. So to digitalize this sound, we've seen that you will need to use items like a microphone, if people are to have it in form of digital as someone is singing, to convert it such that someone automatically records it in a proper way. I don't know how many of you have visited recording studios. So CDs are digital, as we have seen, and they help us to turn this sound on using our speakers for you to easily hear it. So there are different formats of CDs, of course, and they store them in different forms. CDs usually save them in zeros and ones, and ordinary CDs usually at 700 megabytes, very small. Less than a GB. Then you can find them in different forms of music. They can be .vlss, they can be .waves, they can be in all kinds of formats. But again, just know that in whatever, the moment it has been converted to digital, it's already in our zeros and ones. And so the CD-ROM drive can be able to read the pattern and interpret the code to produce music using the speakers. This is just an illustration of a CD-ROM drive and also some of the input devices that can help us in doing these conversions as well. So a CD-ROM drive is digital because look at its input as zeros and ones. Place them on your computer and you're able to play them on any kind of output. Okay, so why can't a CD-ROM drive play MP3 sound files if they save them on a CD and yet they're all binary? It depends on the format. And that's why you see once they're digital, it's always very easy to convert them to a different format. I'll give you an example. Look at a Word document. You can't open a Word document in Excel. You can't open an Excel sheet in PowerPoint. Those are just conflicting programs. The same thing applies to the CD-ROM drives and MP3 player sounds, or MP4 or waves. Each of them are saved in their different formats. So you can't open one format from another format. You'll need to have a converter, a program which will have to help us to convert it into what is readily readable by that particular program. And that gives us more reason to keep digital, because digital files are characterized by they're easily transmittable. They're very easy to receive. These days, even ringtones, look at ringtones. You can put all forms of ringtones. You just hear someone's, you call someone's ringtone, you like it, you press star, I think star 9, and you get the ringtone, as long as you're able to pay for it 700 shillings as a way of copyrights, because the ethics behind it is to ensure that you motivate the original musicians who have registered. So digital files can easily be stored and retrieved. That's another characteristic. We've seen digital files, of course, are faster than analog files. Digital files can be manipulated, especially if they're images. I don't know if you've seen some images of late where people are getting people's photos and you write all kinds of things. Why? That is manipulation of this digital media in any format. So next we would want to look at our hard drive disk. And by the way, these are questions we must always ask you as you do your reading, which I definitely know you have already begun. I imagine you are already looking at what do we term as hard disk drives, and we look at also a number of the components of hard disk drives and be able to describe them. Okay, so hard disk drives, we define them. A hard disk drive is a data storage device in a computer. It's a secondary storage device. And of course, it's stored in, because it's digital format, zeros and ones. The operating system, the software, etc., all other files are stored on our hard disk drive. If you buy a computer and it has no hard disk drive, it can't go on. It has nowhere it can actually be able to run. So this hard disk drive is that part that helps us to do the storage, and it's the beginning part of any digital forensics. They were first invented by IBM, the very first hard drives in 1954. Nowadays, hard disk drives are with 3 to 5 inches, or even 5 to 2.5 inches flatter. In terms of, they're getting better, they're getting stronger, they're getting bigger, and yet getting smaller. They may have different capacities. Some may be 10 GB, some may go up to 80, some may go now to terabytes, as we are going to see in the kinds of storage. You should know how to identify different parts, please, of this hard drive. We always mention it that we can set and draw for you something. Get a hard copy somewhere, and we ask you to label, where is the spindle? Label the slider, label the arm, label the axis, and actuator, label the SCI connector. These connectors are very important. You must know in order as you're doing the acquisition, as you're going to make the images, you need to know these different connectors. And of course, we are going to spend some time on describing them. There's one here, the SCSI interface connector. Then we have our jumpers. Look at the jumpers. And of course, you need to know what they're used for. Jumpers and the pins. Then of course, this part here is for the power cable. So we need to know How do you want to connect it for it to read? One, it must have power. That's the input. Then two, if its output here is an SCSI connector, then we need to have this connector that is going to your computer, so it can be able to read it and get information from it. We need to know who the platters are. Look at them, the 3 different levels. You need to know, of course, the casing, the outer casing, because there are things you're always opening. Look at the ribbons here. The ribbons help us to attach the heads to the logic board. In terms of they have a little small logic, like a little motherboard there. Then we have the tape seal. The tape ceilings usually help in telling us who the authors or who the manufacturers are, and even the serial number. So this one is always a must read. There are always questions that always come concerning this hard drive, its components, its uses, and we should be able to get them because we set them permanently. In section A, I've told you in your exams, we'd never pick them from, get questions from heaven. No, they're all here. We can set them with some case studies, but more importantly is for you to understand how do you explain them from that perspective. Okay, look at it again. The main components of the hard disk, you've seen a disk platter. We need to know it, the head arm to help us do the reading, the head actuator because it keeps moving, and of course the chassis is the outer block that it has. We'll take time and describe some of the basics. What is a disk platter? A disk platter is made up of the magnetic material. If the flat disk, in the flat disk part of the drive, yes, it is this disk platter, or it's because of this magnetic part of this disk that we say we actually keep it very well in within. It is either padded, just to ensure that we do not want it to be taken up, or we do not want it to be injured. So when we are looking out for how are we actually saving this material, we make sure that we have it on, we keep it in within those cushioned boards to ensure that it doesn't break. Because it's magnetic, it can quickly lose its content. And of course, it's stored on these disk platters. The data is stored in these platters. Okay, so each set of magnetic particles is a collection or unit that is called a bit. A new hard drive technology use very thin films of metals and glass platters to increase the efficiency and drive the storage capacity. So, and that's why we say we keep them because they are very fragile. You drop a glass, you know what happens. You drop a small magnet, you know what happens. Very thin films that can easily break. Those are the disk platters. How do we set this? We can tell you, write short notes on the following: disk platters, stepper motors, spindle motors, and you see students running berserk wondering, madam, where do you get these ones from? Stepper motors, these ones are for controlling the read-write header positions. You know, as it is moving, doing the reading, writing, yes, it's the one that positions it. The stepper motors usually use a 12 voltage of power, but some newer ones use even very limited power of up to 5 volts of power source. The spindle motors help us to control the platter. This motor rotates, you know, it keeps moving, rotating round, round, round. That's why if you ever put your ear next to a storage device, you'll always hear some little bit of noise, especially the very old computers. And maybe nearly faulty hard drives are also able to make that kind of noise. That means there is something that happened. It either dropped down, and many times when it drops and it breaks, that's it. You need to do a thorough replacement. And that's for this reason, that's why we don't go about breaking and dropping our laptops or any hard drive anywhere, you basically are destroying all the material it's carrying. So spindle motors, we've seen that they help in controlling this platter, and the motor keeps rotating at different speeds. Speeds can range from 3,600 to 10,000 ramps per minute. So they are real scanning and moving and reading at a very fast rate. All the platters move in the same direction. So if they're moving clockwise, that is it. If they're moving anti-clockwise, they all move in the same direction. The read and write headers. Yes, when you're reading or when you're writing, those are different. Reading, you're really not doing much, you're only picking information from it. While writing, you have to be writing onto our disk platter, because we've said our disk platter is the one that helps in storing the actual information. So these headers are the ones that help us to do the writing and scratching of this information. Of course, in its language, but it's digital in zeros and ones. So the headers, the read headers and writers write the information onto the disk platter. So the head writes the magnetic information on within the platter. It's just like if you've ever seen, yes, DJs on TV, you're able to see them spinning some discs. It is the read-write headers that are always spinning and people keep shaking their heads, jumping up and down. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. It's because they keep moving them in the opposite direction of what and where they're heading to. But of course, the technology has greatly improved. If you look at what the spindles used to look like and the headers of these platters at the long time ago, oh my God, they used to be something else, very archaic. But these days they have greatly improved. So we have our head arms, and these are used for reading and writing operations. They have the tracks, we have sectors, we have cylinders, we have storage capacities. Some of these you need to pick. Look at A. A is our track, B is the sector, C is the cylinder, and D is the storage. Where is D? D is the green one. D is the storage capacity that is available for it. So those are basic structures of what we have in within our disk. And of course, our tracks here, we try to explain all of these that we've seen. Tracks, here we are saying the hard disk drive is divided into a number of concentric circles called tracks. Circular paths in sections are called tracks. The sectors are called tracks. The sectors are the data storage areas in one track that are multiplied or divided into multiple blocks, and we call these sectors. Each sector can be divided into 512 bytes of data. Cylinders are a set of corresponding tracks in all sides of the hard drive, and these are known as cylinders. Information where you're going to actually store this information. And of course, our illustrations, I'll just take us back here to get our illustrations well. The C is the cylinder where you're saving that information. The A are the tracks, these little circular items. Then the B are the sectors. Then the D is the actual storage capacity. If you say for 1, 2, 3, 4 that are 3 that are highlighted, then you can get a storage capacity for those particular tracks. Okay, the storage capacity, as we've seen, it has a formula shown below. Oh, sorry, I see the wrong spelling of formula. A formula of below. To get a storage capacity, it's the number of cylinder tracks multiplied by our cylinders. So this is the sector track multiplied by the bytes per second that will give us the storage capacity of what you have. How many tracks are there and how many cylinders are they able to contain? That is what will determine the capacity of that storage device. Okay, jumpers. This is just at the back end. Look at what we are currently having. These are what we are terming as our jumpers. Okay, in these jumpers here, this is the back end here. If you remember very well what we had shown you on the hard drive, just at the back, this side. These jumpers have different positionings, and of course they have little jackets. Jackets are little sheaths, plastic sheaths, the covers that you can fit in and pull out. We have a master and we have a slave. So whenever you're transferring information, you need to make the one which has the information a master. At the receiving side, it will then be a slave. So you need to check them and make sure that the jumper is right here to where master is. Then automatically the other part will be the opposite, which is receiving this information coming from the master. Then the second one, the third part here is for the cable sector. And the last one has no use. And you know, every time you want to pick information from a flash, from a hard disk, or even change passwords, erase passwords, it's always the master and slave that you're always working with. So here they're showing us these pins arranged in terms of, they can be rows or they can be columns to get us into two sets of pairs. So it's this playing up and down with these different jumpers that finds it useful. Imagine system administration, you were able to look at a number of these and be able to appreciate even their use even further. Partitioning of hard disk drives. We have them partitioned in 4 bits. One is the first partition is always for the operating system. So whether they call it C, whether they call it whatever you'd want to call it, it's the very first part that will contain our operating system, which must be located in the primary location of your drive. Only primary partitions can be used to boot the operating system. Otherwise, your hard drive will not be in position to be able to get started. We have the extended partition. A hard drive may contain only one extended partition. And here we are saying that these extended partitions can be subdivided into multiple other small parts. You know how you get the seed, that's the main one for the operating system, then you get D, E, F, etc. So you can get those extended partitions, and even further, you can go ahead and come up with another set of a partition. For example, if your hard disk, if you'd want to install both Windows and Linux, so you'll make the component where you're going to have Linux as our logical partition. So the Linux operating system can be installed into and run from our logical partition. Then of course, if you have much more space, you can have other active partitions. Only one partition of the computer can be set as the active partition and bootable partition. For example, if you're using Windows, the partition that contains Windows is the active partition, which is C. Our C-ROM drive, our C drive is the one that will have our partition, and it will be our active partition in this case at the same time as our primary partition, because it's containing the most important part that turns on and off of a computer. As we wind up, we'd want to look at the differences between FAT and NTFS. FAT in full is a file allocation table. Yes, we can ask you this question. Differentiate or give us any 2 differences, or any 3, or any 1 difference between a FAT partition of a disk and an NTFS as well. Let me quickly pick up for you what FAT is in full. FAT is file allocation table, while NTFS is new technology filing system. We'll see from this table that several items which can help us to compare them. FAT usually has no security. If you want more security items, then you save your work in form of NTFS. This one has more security. FAT partition sizes usually go to a maximum of 32 GB, while NTFS can go even bigger to terabytes, I don't know, petabytes, zettabytes, zilobytes. We will be able to see all those different sizes. So if you have anything that is small, usually FATs are for smaller flash disks, 32 GB and below, okay? Then FAT does not support data compression. Data compression means that you cannot reduce the data. You can't make it any smaller. You can't zip it any further to try and remove any redundancy in spaces. No, it is just there. While this one, NTFS, allows us to have a lot of data compression. Then FAT does not support disk quotas, while NTFS supports disk quotas in terms of the ability to divide it into smaller bits and portions. Yes, look at a flash drive. You cannot divide a flash drive into several parts. You think about it. On your flash drive, can you ever say, this is part C, part D, part E, F? No, it will always appear as only one partition. So that's why we say there are no disk quotas on a flash disk, because it is FAT oriented. That is how it's manufactured. While for a hard disk is an NTFS, that's why you see it has different parts. We're able to have it divided into those partitions, the primary, the extended, and all the other parts that we have seen in a previous slide. So Windows compatibility, yes, FAT is usually very compatible with the olden kinds of Windows, while NTFS has moved on into what is now trending ever since the year 2000 to Vista, Win 7. I think now we're like on Windows 11. Yes, so that is what NTFS is able to do. So if we ask you at any time to differentiate between these two, of course, with examples, that will even be much easier. Okay, it's very, very important for us to appreciate and know those cables. You remember those interfaces on, let me quickly just take you back to these interfaces, because those are the ones we want to see. You have a hard drive. You go to the place where you're going to carry out this investigation, and you are now wondering, oh, I think we've gone very far. Yes, you've gone and you now have this hard drive and you want to pick this information. How are you going to pick it? You look at the different ports at the back, because you must have those cables with you. Is it a PATA? Is it a SATA? Is it an SCSI, or is it an IDE? Those are the different types of cables that you will need. Of course, power cables are there. Jumpers we've seen. Next are the types of cables that you will need. And these are the ones, if you remember very well, in your box for the forensic person, those are things we mentioned you must always have. Okay, so those are the parts I wanted to just quickly bring you to recall those three types of cables. It is IDI or PATA. IDI in full is integrated device electronics. PATA is parallel advanced technology attachment. This is usually longer. It has 40 pins. It's a 40-pin connector. It transfers its rates at 133 Mbps. And when it's installed, this type of hard drive ensures that the jumpers are always correctly configured. If you have two devices connected to one IDI controller, one must be set as a master and the other has to be set as a slave. That's what we're saying. When you're picking this information on the jumper side, you make it one a master, one a slave, because the master is serving the slave. So if at any one time you're picking information, you need to know where you're changing these jumpers accordingly. Look at this. This is where we have the PATA or the IDI cable. This is a hard drive again. However, take note of this cable. This blue cable, the blue and the black, are what you have, and they contain 40 small pins. 40 small pins are what they have, of course, 20 up, 20 down. Okay, next we want to look at the SATA. The SATA cables, SATA in full stands for Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. I'll give an example. In the last exam for Dicto Forensics, we actually asked the students to describe what SATA is and what PATA is. You didn't see trouble. Some would recall what SATA was, some would not even know what SATA. They would really be like, we've never heard of this, it is not there. And yet I'm telling you that it is, those are the ports at the back of a hard disk drive. And this is what we mainly use when we are carrying out our forensics. So it has, this one is smaller. The SATAs, the serial ports usually have only, here we are saying that it has a 7-pin connector. And we're saying this 7-pin connector is it's the latest high-speed type of hard drive connectors. Our data transfers are beyond the 300 and beyond Mbps, and they are faster than the PATAs or the IDI. They are the latest kind in the drives that we have, as well as these are used, are very useful in within the interfaces. That is the interface of the hard drive. Of course, they are faster than the older IDI interface. The SATA power connector, look at it. If the motherboard has a SATA connector, the sockets are shown as below. In terms of on your motherboard, that is where you will see where to connect this, or even at the back end where you connect your SATA cables or the PATA cables as well. The third type we see is the SCSI. Okay, this is still an illustration of our SATA and the SATA cables. And they have, of course, smaller because they're only 7-pin. While we've seen for the PATA cables, the PATA cables had up to 40 pins. And those are key core things you need to take note of. Okay, so we have our SCI, which is now the most modern one that we use. SCI is Small Computer System Interface. In the small computer system interface, here we are seeing that it has more pins. It can have up to 50 to 59 pin connectors, little small connectors in rows. 30, look at them here. And these are very useful because they help us in connecting different devices. These are the cables that you must always have in your forensic bag. It has 50 to 60 of them. The transfer rate is twice as the other one, 600 MBS, and they require that cable and adapter. The SCSI adapter card that is connected into the system. So nowadays, most computers do not use this one. It's for the olden ones. And you look at the back end. This back end, as you see, is for those olden big computers, and the PATAs and SATAs and the SCIs are right in within the middle to help them run from one place, to pick power from the motherboard, get power from outside. That is what our small computer system interface helps us do. So depending on if you're dealing with a customer with an old computer, you need to have the right ones. If they have the SCSI, have the right cables such that you do not fail to carry out a transfer and you're saying, oh, sorry, I didn't know they had this old version. Have the old, have the new, expect to pick information and go on with your work. The main problem created by hard disk drives is that really they do not have an operating system. They can't live on their own. They need to have an interface where you can be able to boot. And of course, sometimes we've seen that they have disk boot failures. Yes, you keep a hard drive, you drop it, it's injured by weather. I'm telling you, you lose all your information. By the way, that cuts across also with these hard disk drives that we have, yes, you can lose all the information as externals. You use it as a backup, and yet you're always throwing the bags down, you're destroying this, and I'm telling you, the time you need it, you will find that, oh, sorry, all the information is not accessible. And that will take you now into further forensic tools, looking for more forensic tools to do our data recovery. Our capacities vary. We start from the small ones. We start, the smallest is our 0 ones, which are the bits. We get kilobits, those are 1,000 of them. We get bytes, which are 8 bits. Kilobits are 1,024 bits. Bytes are only 8 bits that make 1 byte. And of course, 8 bits are what will make 1 character of a word, like A or B. Okay, then we now go to, from bytes, we go to kilobytes, which are 1,000 bytes. We go to megabytes. Megabytes are 1,000 kilobytes or 1 million bytes. Then we go to gigabytes. Gigabytes are 1 billion bytes or 1,000 megabytes. So you keep on adding it in that kind of state. Then we then go from megabytes, we go to terabytes, we go, from gigabytes, we had gigabytes, then we go to terabytes. They're not terabytes, the tera, T-E-R-A. Then we go to petabytes, then we go to zettabytes, exabytes, sorry. Then we go to zettabytes, and we go to zotabytes. By the way, now, it's Facebook that gave us this nomenclature. Before, we had stopped on petabytes, and people were not buying any devices beyond petabytes. But when Facebook came in, my God, we had to go back and look for the nomenclature. They had IEEE and all those SCM, all those big international associations had to sit and agree on a new nomenclature. And of course, as they keep getting to these zotabytes, and we'll say, okay, what are 1,000 zotabytes? They will now go back and look for something else. We don't know where they seem to have finished the vocabulary or the bytes from the Y's to the Z's to the X's. We will see where they will go to. And they'll come back to the A. We will see what they will label them as. Okay, I would want to thank you very much. I see it is 6 o'clock. We'll just have a small break of 2 minutes. Then we proceed on with our chapter 5, because we want to cover our acquisition process. This one is still part of the hard disk work. Okay. So let me quickly share our next one. Okay. Yes, I would like to welcome you. I would like to welcome you back to class. And we would want to now look at our acquisition. And our focus is to see that by Friday, we should now be able to carry out furthermore items, furthermore add-ons or hands-on items on the acquisition process. But it's very, very important that before we look at this the practical and tutorial, the application bit, the theory is understood. So here they have lots of wordings in acquisition. You already know some of them because we have noticed, why do we use this? Why do we use the other? And of course, there are so many screenshots. I'm so sure that by 7, we will be done. Allow us to get started along our data acquisition process. So by end of this chapter 5, they'll be able to have covered a list of digital evidence storage formats. If you remember very well, during the forensic process on Friday, and I'll still tell you, Friday, 2 o'clock is time that we have put aside specifically to help us do our practicals. Otherwise, if we are just going to do theory minus understanding how do we actually do this digital forensics and without any tools, it will be very tough. So we're going to look at what are the different types of formats. We'll only look at 3 most commonly used ones. We'll explain the types and ways in which we determine the best acquisition method. We'll describe the contingency planning. What are the plan A, B, C, Ds? Because we said in carrying out data acquisition, you don't only make the data acquisition once. No. Make a copy and make other copies, make other copies. That is the contingency plan. Why? Purposes are known. In case one doesn't work, in case one gets affected, then you have another place to start from. We'll explain how to use acquisition tools as well, and of course, using an example. We look at validation. What is validation? And why do we validate? You know, as part of the process of what we did even on the last Friday, and that's where we shall start from on this Friday, looking at our acquisition process again. We'll see how do we describe the raiding places. Raiding, I told you what it's all about. It's partitioning, dividing your what you've acquired, your image, into smaller parts. You divide it in just like how would partition a hard drive. That is what your RAID does. So if you want it to be in one partition, in one group, or save that image as a group, then we typed 0, and that way you're able to have everything saved in one location. We also look at how do we use remote network acquisition tools. And also we will list some forensic tools that are available for this data acquisition. And of course, Friday, we are going to look at the access that we've seen that is open source, it is free, it is downloadable, and many more others that are available on our menu. So these are the 3 formats in which we save our digital evidence. When you're saving your image, you either make it as a raw format or as a proprietary format or as an advanced forensic format. But of course, you remember on that particular slide, it had even other types of formats. So we want to describe these 3, which are the most commonly used formats. So if we choose the raw format, it's one that makes it possible to rewrite this bit stream or rewrite our image to the file. The advantage is that it has it's very fast in making these data transfers. It ignores minor errors, minor reading errors on the source drive. It's most computer forensic tools, most of them read this kind of raw format. That's the advantage. The disadvantage are 2. One is that they require much space as the original disk. So if the original disk is 20 GB, that means also you who's making an image needs to have an image available. The empty space minimum should have our 20 GB. So imagine if you're to make a second one, hey, 40 GB should be available. So that's a disadvantage. You can't compress it, you can't reduce it, you can't remove any other small redundant parts, no. The tools may not collect the marginal or bad sector. The moment it reads, you know, as it keeps reading, you've seen how the hard disk now is located in those little sectors. When any of the sectors are injured, sorry, it's not in position to read it. That is our raw format. Proprietary format. The features offered here are often able to compress, and the option is to compress and not to compress image files. You can compress the files in the proprietary format. You can split the image into smaller segments. Remember, we talked about the RAIDs. So if you want to convert them or break them into smaller parts, save it into part A, part B, C, D, E, F. Those are different RAIDs. So you can split it. So what allows you to split it is this proprietary format. The first format, no. That is our raw format, no. If it is 10 GB, give it 10 GB. For it, it's good enough to go. This one can integrate metadata into the image file. Metadata is data about data. Basically, it is the description of that data that you're collecting. That component is available for proprietary, which the other one doesn't have. Disadvantages, however, its inability to share an image between different tools. You can't share images from the proprietary formats from one tool to another tool, open another tool, yet the raw format allows for that. Then look at the file size limitation. It has a maximum file size limitation for each segment volume. And usually we noticed it on that other format we're using for the compression. When looking at it and it was showing each segment can go up to 1,500. That is the size. And so if you want to keep on with proprietary, then you choose it because it can help you to break them down, save them in smaller cylinders, which are portable. But reading them, you'll have to take time and read them also in their small cylinders, small sectors. Otherwise, you want it in one way, keep it as raw and get it enough space. The third type is the advanced forensic format. This was developed by Dr. Simpson Garfinkel. So Garfinkel came up with this format, and its goal is to, it provides, part of its characteristics, it provides compression. It provides compressed or uncompressed images. It's okay. If you want them compressed, they are there. You don't want them compressed, it's okay. But this one helps us to at least reduce the size drastically, and it removes lots of those extra spaces, as we shall see. No size, it has no size restriction on the disk to image files. It provides space in the image file or segment files for metadata. So one similarity with the proprietary is that it allows for metadata as well. Then it has a simple design with extensibility within the AFF. Also, it's open source and it's good and can be used on multiple platforms. Unlike the other one here where we're saying it cannot be stored from one platform to another. No, look at this, its inability to be shared between different tools. Those are the platforms. Advanced forensic format allows us to share it from different operating systems, different platforms, different tools, AFF. So it's also one of the other common methods, and we like it because it also allows us to compress or uncompress the image files that we are saving. In addition is that it has internal consistency checks for self-authentication. Our file extensions include AFD for segmented images, and also .afm for the advanced forensic format metadata. And of course, it's open source as well in terms of it's highly available. Okay, so when you're choosing the acquisition methods, we reached a point where we have to choose between two types. Are we using static or live acquisition? There are two types of acquisition. And in each of these types of acquisitions, we have 4 methods that we have to pick from. They equally have the advantages, the disadvantages, and we'll be able to describe them in the next slide. So these are just very theoretical, but important for us to understand. So when we go to do the acquisition on Friday, we should be able to understand, Madam, why are we saying it is a bit stream disk to disk? It's a particular type, and it has particular advantages for it. Logic disk, sparse data disk, it has all different explanations. Okay, let us proceed on with describing our bitstream. Here, of course, the question we always ask are different types of acquisition methods or different methods that are used in the acquisition. That's when we expect you to give us any of them. We always ask you for types of acquisition. Those are 2, either static or live. Live meaning that, yes, it's currently ongoing and someone is working on it, you are touching and picking information. That is live. Static, you keep it away, save it, and go and handle it within your lab. That's why we call it static, after having frozen it. That's the difference between the two. So the fourth method that we have of acquisition, we have one as our bitstream disk to image file. This is the most common method, and it can make more than one copy. Remember, that's why we always like it a lot. It copies bit by bit replications of the original drive. And of course, we know what these bits are. The bits are the smallest format in which we can save our digital data, as we had just seen. There are several tools that allow for this bitstream disk to image method. We have ProDiscover is a tool, it's a type. EnCase forensic toolkit, which we used and we shall use again. There is Smart, there is SleuthKit, there is Xway, there is iLook. So we can ask you all forms of objectives. Which of the following tools? Yes, we must ask in all forms, but the Wawa paper is very soon and we shall set them in smaller. Yes, we shall set it. I will tell you when we are going to have it. I hope you're reading. We had said at least before we go for any face-to-face sessions, we shall be able to do that. So really get ready. Within next week, I will enable it. I will tell you the exact time it is ready. I just need to hear from you. We need 1.5 hours when each of you can sit and do it. Hope you're not sharing any gadgets. You need to have your own and get stable network to be able to handle our objectives. Okay. Bitstream disk to disk is the second method. When disk to image copy is not possible, that first one fails, then you consider the second one here, which is bit disk to disk acquisition method. It considers the disk's geometry configuration, and here we mainly use EnCase, uses it, SafeBack, and also SnapCopy mainly use it as well. Okay, our third version that we have is our logic acquisition or our sparse acquisition. When your time is limited, you go to a particular place to carry it out and I've only given you maybe 30 minutes or 1 hour, then you just make a logical acquisition. Logical acquisition captures only specific files of interest of that particular case. Sparse acquisition also collects our fragments of unallocated or deleted data. Then, of course, a minute. So our logic acquisition or the sparse acquisition is used when we have very limited data. In a logic acquisition, it captures only specific files of interest. Like if you want to pick folder A, folder B, C, only those and off you go. You will choose our logic acquisition, which allows us. The sparse acquisition also collects the fragments of this unallocated space where you have those deleted ones. It's able to pick them as well. It's also good for large disks. And in what formats do we have them? The .psts or .ost mail files. And of course, it works well also with our RAIDER servers. We told you about RAIDers. RAIDers allow us to save this information in smaller bits and smaller silos. So when making a copy, consider the size of the source disk. That's always important. How big is the source disk? 1 petabyte. Okay, so you will now choose which one. Do you want to compress it? Do you have an eco disk, maybe a Zillow? I don't know if your server you have is maybe a Zilobyte. Is it an Zettabyte? Is it? You would want to get one that can allow us to have it in that kind of format before you lose the information that you have. We use digital signatures to help us in verification. You use digital signatures for verification purposes. So when working with large drives, an alternative is using our tape backup systems. So whether you can retain a disk or not, but let's try to use one where you're able to make a similar or even another copy of a disk. Contingency plans, that's the one we told us, come up with a plan A, come save a second version, a third one, so that you don't lose the information. We create duplicate copies of this evidence image file. We make at least 2 image files of digital evidence, and we use different tools or techniques. We copy host protect areas of a disk drive as well. And of course, we consider under the hard drive acquisition tools that can acquire or that can access the drive at the BIOS level. Be prepared to deal with encrypted drives. And that's why we looked at, I think it was one of the early chapters, one of the challenges we expect to see is that those encrypted drives, once you don't have the decryption tools, you may not be able to read from them. So whole disk encryption features, for example, like in Windows Vista or Ultimate or Express, Enterprise editions, all these usually have lots of encrypted drives. So expect them, and of course that will help us in undoing them. How do we use these acquisition tools? We use acquisition tools in Windows. Also whether in Linux, but we use these tools mainly in Windows. Advantage is that we make acquisition evidence for the suspect's disk more convenient, especially when using the host swappable devices. A disadvantage is that we must protect, we write protect each of these acquired files with a well-tested write blocking hardware device. And of course, we saw on Friday that it's either hardware or software, depending on what you can afford and what is available for us to carry out this our acquisition. Windows XP write protection with USB devices. We already saw it. If you're using USBs like that, in that as example we did, USBs are usually write protected. And of course, once you block any writings to USB drives, you can't be able to pick information from it. So one of the first things you do, you need to go and remove this write protection. It's usually a small lock on the side to make sure you can copy and pick information from this flash drive. Our target drive needs to be connected to internal devices. And of course, we need these cables, either the PATA, the parallel transfer attachment cables or IDI, or we use the SATA, which is the serial ports, or we use our small computer, small interface, the SCSI controllers. Steps to update our registry. Remember we looked at we looked at our registry. And so steps to update our registry for Windows. If you're using XP, with Savix Pack 2, that is one of the old operating systems. It's very important that we save and back up the registry. The registry is like your log that you have. You remember what we did in the first practical using the RegShot? It helps us to keep this registry. And that's why it's the first thing you do. Make a RegShot and save it. So that in case someone goes to delete anything, if there's any modification on the register, when it's write protected, then you can always be able to pick it up by running that same test, the RegShot test, to test that the integrity of our disk or information has not changed in any way. The next slides are just showing us what we do expect when you're starting your process of write protection. And of course, we're saying, so when you're trying to get this write protection for the USB, you need to run it. And you see, when you're attached, it will tell you restore files and settings. You choose either recommended or you choose a different storage point, either of them. Recommended store is what is most feasible. Sit here. See. Linux can access a disk that isn't mounted, yes. And that's why we say that if you're using Linux, you don't need to use a write blocker. Write blockers only are for Windows computers. Windows operating systems and newer Linuxes automatically mount and access a drive. Forensic Linux live CDs don't access media automatically, which eliminates the need for this write blocker. So using our Linux live CD distribution, Linux is able to contain any conditional utilities. Acquiring data using Linux as we go on is the one that uses our live acquisition. Using Linux live CD distribution, we can use different tools. For example, we can be able to use Helix, we can use Penguin Sleuth, we can use FCCU. All these are available when you're using Linux. These are tools you can use when you're carrying out the Linux live acquisition. When you're preparing for a targeted drive for acquisition in Linux, then the Linux distributions can create different types of formats. We've seen Microsoft FAT or even the NTFS partition tables. Again, it goes back to which type do you want? We've seen challenges of FAT versus NTFS. In FAT, there's no security. In FAT, you can't partition it. In FAT, you can't, it's really very rigid. While in NTFS, it has the opposite and it is more sustainable. So it's up to you to choose which versions you would want to use. So when preparing for a target drive, it's important for us to use this fdisk. In Linux, fdisk will help us to create these lists. It will delete, it will verify partitions that are available in Linux of what you're going to pick up. You can further on use this command if you're getting it into the FAT format using Linux. mkf.ms-dos. And remember we said for FAT, FAT usually works for olden computers that still use DOS and the olden operating systems. NTFS are for the most modern ones that we usually use. So acquiring data using Linux, we always make sure we use the DD. You will see in our next, as part of the acquisition, we shall see what are data dumps. What are dumps? These are DDs. How do we carry out the data dumping? How are we able to check that there's some data that was dumped? Data that was dumped is data that was thrown somewhere, kept somewhere, and they don't want you to have access to it. So you can read and write from media devices and data files. You can create raw format files now that we know raw format files. And of course, most computer forensic tools can always read raw format files. There are some shortcomings of the data dump command. It may require some more advanced skills than an average user. And of course, it doesn't compress data. We will see and use it on Friday. Please ensure by 2 o'clock, we all log in to be able to see how this is made possible. The DD command combined with the split command segments outputs into separate volumes. It acquires data using the DCF LDD in Linux. Okay, so our data dump command is intended as a data management tool, and it's not designed for forensic acquisition. It's just part of the process of just checking and verifying the information that you have on that hard drive. When we are capturing an image with ProDiscover, now here they're just giving us an example using ProDiscover. We will just read through, but that will not be important because we don't have this tool. ProDiscover is, you pay for ProDiscover. So for us, our own, this example is for us to just know, okay, those are the steps. Those are what you expect to select. This is what you expect to find. However, the most important thing for us is what we shall see using our FTK for acquisition, or even using the access tool, acquisition tool that helps us to do, that will help us to do our acquisition very well. So it's very important to know, but this one are just giving us an expectation of what we need. Our usual steps, you always need to document the chain of evidence. The hierarchy, the chain of authority. We start from here, you fill in the forms. Once you're called to carry out a forensic investigation, you remove the hard drive from the suspect's computer, then attach the suspect's jumpers as needed, because you're going to do a transfer using either the pattern or the SATA. Okay, so it's important for us. These are just like the basics when you're starting. You're called to a place, we get there and we need to carry out a forensic investigation. First things first, paperwork, seeking permission. Then thereafter, we remove our hard drive because that is the real thing we want to do. And of course, we've said you either need to make it a slave or a master, depending on who is transferring where. Then of course, connect the suspect's drive to yours, and you're able now to carry out the acquisition. We said create image is what we always click. So if you're using, for example, a tool like ProDiscover, the image file can be split into, ProDiscover supports the proprietary acquisition format, and our image can be split into small segments of up to 650 megabytes. But I'll tell you, the smaller the images, the more the trouble when combining this information. It's better when we keep it as a whole than dividing it into small bits and pieces. Putting it together when you're doing the analysis, will take you more time when it's in within the smaller groups. But some people will tell you it's easier to search for small portions. This is the part, of course, we've jumped quite a number of steps here. The part where you select if you want to split them into equal sizes. There's a maximum. Of course, for us, we said we click 0 if we want to keep it as 1. If you want to split them into those little small blocks, then you keep it up to 650 megabytes. So you can get the image numbers, the sizes, and all these sectors, and you proceed on, okay. Using ProDiscover, you choose raw acquisition format. And of course, we've seen now, right from the definition, why a raw acquisition format does work well. If it's in Unix, we select the DD format or the different acquisition image formats from our list. Yes, we will also be able to use, we are going to use the Access Data Forensic Toolkit Imager. We're going to use the open source one. The open source one is just short, it's just for a few, it's valid for 30 days, but we can get any hacked versions. But this one is quite very limited in what it does. But it's also one of those that you can use in carrying out our images. It makes our disk to image copies of our evidence drive. We're able to create these disk to image copies. And of course, at the logical partitions and physical drive levels, we can segment the image in terms of divide it into smaller portions. So you can use ProDiscover, or even you can go ahead and even use Access. Different forensic toolkits are what one can use. You can use FTK Imager, any tool that you have access to. As long as you've carried out your right blocking, you have your evidence, you're following your procedures, you go to File, Create Image, and proceed on to get this image, depending on where you want to store it. This is our FTK Imager that we saw the last time. This top part at the top is the tree, our tree segment showing folder. Then of course, whatever is in the tree, it's like a file explorer. Have you ever opened a file and on one side, on your left side, you will see summaries of a storage device, hard disk, of C, or flash disk, this. You will be able to, then on the other side, you will see its descriptions. So that is how our FTK Imager exactly works for us. Once you attach it in and you're creating the image, you are able to have the image window that is displayed in this format. The lower two windows show us more details. The lower window on properties will show us the properties of that particular file that you click on. If it's a folder, it's what will show. Then the content showing what it contains will show on this other lower side. Let me quickly show you where I'm talking about. This one here is for the properties, while when you click on one of the files here, it will display all the content of that particular file here. This part here, we've said the moment you have like your hard disk C or your F disk, your flash drive or whatever drive it is, you're able to see it here. You will click here and you will see its content, corresponding content will appear in this, our next part here. Okay. This is just a common tool that we'll just keep on seeing and see how, when we click File, Create Image, the process of creating this image comes in. What is this image? A copy of what you're going to start doing our forensic analysis. Our expectation is that we should now be able to select what is our source, what is our destination of where we want to save it, and of course the types. Boot to Windows, connect the evidence disk to a write blocker, connect our target disk to the write blocker, then you start your FTK Imager. We click File and Create Disk Image. That one we have saved. and we will see. We use our physical drive option. Let us see. Physical drive option, you remember what it contains? Physical drive option from our tutorial was alerting us that we use our physical drive option when we are using partitions or creating an image of a flash drive. Logical drives, if it is for a drive C, a hard disk. Image files, if you're making a copy of an existing image that you have. Then if you want just for a smaller folder, bring here. If you want just for a smaller, let me give you, for a smaller file, then you will choose this folder, that last option that we are looking at here. So these are the options. This one is for flash drive, a hard disk, creating a second copy of an image, and this part here, if you're just picking a small part of an image, you only want to create one for a hard drive or a particular folder. Sorry, not a hard drive. So those are the different options that we choose. Okay. Different types of data. So we began from in this chapter. Do you want to save it as a raw data of this image, or SMART, or EDI, or AFF, or proprietary? We've seen in what formats. We choose raw. However, you need to know why raw. Raw because it will allow us, it won't allow us, okay, to compress it, but raw will allow us, it's more flexible. It can always be read from platform to platform. And some most commonly used that we always see. Next, you need to know what is your source of what you're picking. Is it a flash drive? That's why we picked physical. Go and pick that flash drive. Then go to see where do you want to create this image. Go create a folder somewhere. Then you click finish. Look at the segment here. Do you see image fragments? How do you want to break this image? If this one allows us to go to 650 MBs per segment. If you don't want a segment, small segments, leaving them as one, you type 0, delete that 650 and just type there 0, click finish, and it will be able to proceed. Look at how the process goes on. It will keep counting this number of minutes remaining, this number of hours, depending on how big the disk is that you're creating. By the way, if you have access to the labs, the tool is there. It was already installed. Our password is forensics, and Access Forensic Toolkit is already installed there. That one doesn't expire. We installed it there with the help of the system admins last year, but we will use small mimicked one, which is free and available for our usage. Next, we have to do validation after our acquisition, or part of the process. However, we need to understand what is validation. Validation, here we're saying that most critical a moment, please. Most critical aspects of computer forensic is validation. You remember we did the hashing. We talk about hashing. This is for testing for integrity. So after we've done an acquisition, test it for integrity. That's why we use the hashing. This requires using the hashing algorithm utility. And the validation techniques are several of them. You can use CRS32, you can use MD5, you can use SHA1, you can use SHA. SHA is secure hash algorithm. It has different versions and different types in carrying out our integrity tests. And of course, we shall see the hashes. You run it, it will give you an output. What is your MD5 and what is your SHA1, for example? Save those numbers. Let me show you an example of them. That's the numbers that we are going to look at here. Okay. So in validating DD acquired data, you can use the MD5 SAM or SHA1 SAM, one SAM utilities. MD5 SAM or SHA1 utilities should be run on the suspect disks and volumes. But why? The issue is for testing for integrity. Validating the DFIDD acquired data. We use these same hash options to designate a hashing algorithm and choosing all options that are there. By the way, we shall even look at how do we do this hashing. There are some extra tools, or even Access itself has those hashing tools. Because at any one time, we told you what the courts of the law always need for digital forensics to be accepted. You must always check that no one has tampered with this data. That's why we do the validity tests. Start with the red shots for the registry analysis, then now run your hashing to check for further validity, to see that yes, the words have not yet changed. No one has changed anything. Any deletions, that shows that yes, there is something fishy that is happening. Hash log option outputs hash results to a text file. Yes, you copy them, put them in a text file or Word document for you to see and compare. We will be able to see how it works. VF stands for verify this file. This option compares the image with the original medium. We will see what we're talking about. In Windows, Windows has no inbuilt hashing algorithm tools for computer forensics. We always install and use third-party forensic tools. But of course, Linux here, it has them. Just like how we saw, Linux doesn't need these write blockers, yet Windows need it. So commercial computer forensic programs also have built-in or inbuilt validation features. Each program has its own validation technique. So if you're using raw file images, these files don't contain metadata. That one we saw. If you want metadata, choose either proprietary or AFF. And those options are also fine. They just have different options. Next, we want to see RAIDing. We've seen what RAIDing is. The process of splitting them into smaller parts. Size is the biggest concern. You may be a forensic expert, but you don't have this access to zettabytes, access to, I don't know, zilobytes, access to petabytes. Yet what you're carrying out is terabytes or terabytes, sorry. So many RAID systems now have terabytes of data. RAID in full is redundant array of independent disks. So this redundant array helps us to compartmentalize them or split them into smaller components. We can have a RAID 0. This provides rapid access and increases storage. However, it lacks redundancy. Then we have RAID 0. RAID, so that you choose different types of RAIDing when you reach the component of if you want to RAID it, you want to split it into smaller components, because we've seen size is a big challenge. By the time you go to RAID 2, you should have done a RAID 1. And of course, a RAID 2 here, we're saying that data is written to a disk on a bit level, and it has better data integrity checking than RAID 0. However, it is slower than RAID 0. RAID 3 will now use data stripping and also dedicated parities. RAID 4 allows data to be written in terms of blocks. So we have different forms of RAIDing, basically trying to remove these data redundancies, splitting them. Don't forget what RAID is in full. It's redundant array of independent disks. And of course, we've seen, see how what they're showing us here. We are RAIDing this disk, this image. We are splitting it into smaller components of 64 kilobytes, 64 KB. It's just like you're splitting them into different RAIDs. So if you want one RAID, know what is the size of the origin disk and of your destination, then see how you want to split them into smaller portions. So these are same RAIDing silos in which you'd want to split them into different disks. I've not put anything. Okay. So understanding RAID is very key for us to proceed on. You can go on to RAID 5s, RAID 6, all the way to RAID 10. And of course, the more the RAIDs, the smaller components for you. So in acquiring RAID disks, what are some of your concerns? How much data storage is needed? What type of RAID are you going to use? 0, 1, 2, or all the way to 10? Do you have the right acquisition tools that can help you to do the RAIDing? Can the tool read this forensically copied data that is RAIDed? Can the tool split the data into saved smaller components? Those are things you need to consider. If you're using old hardware, then sometimes you'll find it challenging to split into smaller bits of your images. And of course, here they're giving us, there are different tools that you can use. Pathway is used technologies like Pathway for ProDiscover, Guidance Software, NCASE, Xway Forensics, different tools, even Access, we will see. Even a forensic toolkit also has that RAIDing, splitting into sizes of 1,500 MBs. As we wind up, we want to see the different tools that can be used remotely. You can decide to use some on a wireless network or on a local area network. So you can remotely connect the suspect's computer via the network connection and copy data from it. So in that case, you need to use tools which have access to remote acquisition tools that vary in configuration and capabilities. Our challenge, because you're relying on the internet, is that our LANs will transfer data and we'll look at the speed. Depending on how speedy the internet is, that is how far you'll do your RAIDing or you'll do your acquisition process. Also, our routing table conflicts may cause some problems. Gaining permission, access, especially if you say, oh, I'm in Uganda, you want to do the acquisition from the US. Having this access may not be very easy as we think. Because of the different speeds that you have over the internet. And of course, permission, we've seen. You don't have access to logging onto this. There are lots of hurdles that you have to always have someone on ground this side to help you. That's why it's better for us to train and get our own forensic experts who can do the work for us. Okay, if you're using ProDiscover, they're giving us some of the things you need to consider. Preview the suspect's drive remotely, perform a live acquisition, encrypt the connection. Then, why encrypt the connection? In case there is, you don't want to avoid any people who are going to sniff, those sniffers, as we saw in chapter 2, those hackers who want to pick on this information in transit, the active and the passive hackers. You want to make sure you don't get them there. So we encrypt our connection. Once you're done, then you now start copying the suspect's computer's RAM. We shall be able to see the RAM dumping as well as what we've seen here in one of our Friday, 2 o'clock again. We log in and we have our session for it. ProDiscover can help in incident response by capturing volatile systems. Yes, we also have, ProDiscover has that volatility test. However, we'll also look at other additional tools we can use for the volatility test. What is volatility? The ability to pick data that is not permanently stored. That is what we term as volatility or volatile information. So we need to analyze our current running processes for it. Okay. So they just keep talking about ProDiscover, but we are going to look at several other tools. We've already talked about the hashing, and the hashing helps us in converting or doing the data validation, just to ensure that we are testing for validity. Again, if you're using ProDiscover, you need to make sure you're using trusted CDs, pre-installed software. These are just prerequisites if you're actually doing this remote access from far and you're to do that acquisition process. The tools, the internet are what you need to first make sure you have and you're in position to proceed ahead. Okay, we've talked about the RAIDing, of course. We've talked about RAM, we've talked about the DD, the data dumps, and we will be able to see how that is done. The RAIDing, we've talked about it. Splitting of data into smaller components. Encryption, we've seen it. Here they look at different types of encryption. Because it's for remote access, we can use the triple DES to do this encryption. And of course, you can choose the raw format acquisition. You can choose all various kinds of filing systems that you're interested in. Of course, take note of the types. Are you using FAT? Are you using NTFS? What is it that you're using? What type of image are you creating? Raw formats or compressed formats, which are raw, that is AFF, or are you using any access network tools? So all these are features and items you need to understand the theory that we have already covered. Here they're giving us a list of several other tools that can be used. You're not only tied to Access, you're not tied to ProDiscover, not to NCASE, not to Forensic Toolkit. There are several. There is Snapback Data Arrest, there is SafeBack, there is DIB US RAID, iLook Investigators, Vogue International, ASR DataSmart, Australia Department of Defense, PY Flag. There are several tools that one can be able to use. Of course, here now they're talking about the capabilities of using like Snapback. Of course, as a forensic expert, you now need to know if you're requiring or you're advising someone on what tool to use. My best advice is getting one which is paid, one which is able to get you as much detail as you can. You will see that there is a limit. There is a limit to the ones that we usually have. I know your class is soon beginning, so we are definitely going to wind up here. Of course, remember we talked about these cables. Why these cables? To help in connecting your hard drive onto where you're collecting your computer. You make one, the one you're picking from the master, and this one a slave, or slave and master, as long as you know who is speaking from where. There are several other tools that are available as well. The NTI SafeBack is also good, it's there. It gives its functions and what it uses and what it's used. DIB, these are basically explained to us what each of these different tools are capable of doing. So in summary of this class, we've been able to look at the different types of images that we can create. There are mainly three. We saw the raw formats, or we can use the proprietary formats or advanced forensic formats. We saw that we can either use static acquisition or a live acquisition. Static if you're using Windows, live if you're using Linux. For data acquisition, it has different four methods, which we described: the disk to image, disk to disk, logical or sparse. The last two are combined. And of course, there are various tools that you are able to follow. And following the process, we said click File, Create Image. Thereafter, you follow through. Are you creating an image of a hard disk drive? Are you creating one for a flash disk? We use physical. Are you creating one for a smaller, just a flash, a particular folder? You choose the relevant components that you use. Of course, we saw the need for this write blocking tool. It has a lot it does in making sure that it freezes the information. We looked at dump, the DD, the data dumping. We looked at validation. We looked at acquisition of some of these tools. We also looked at finally how we can have all kinds of ways of RAIDing. And we said RAIDing is splitting them into smaller compartments because space is a problem. You don't have zettabytes, petabytes, I don't know, zilobytes. You don't have that space. So you can choose to split them into smaller components. Class, you're the best. May God bless you. Meet you on Friday to follow with the practicals of this, our chapter 5. So in today's recording, we've covered both chapter 4 and chapter 5. Have a nice evening and enjoy your next class. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.